our pulmonologist said, take her outside, go for walks. She needs to feel
Mm,
fresh air. Obviously, do activities in a way that's safe, but please continue to live. And so that planted the seed.
Hey, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and today we have Falesha's special topic episode all about machine dependency. It may sound a little dry, but it really isn't. This was a really fun conversation. Falesha is really passionate on the topic, and it is contagious. In it, she talks about the importance of taking training seriously before discharge at the NICU, for our NICU parents out there. The ways she and her husband, Rome, have prioritized living life and traveling with all the medical equipment. Callie has both a trach and a feeding tube. And the duality of emotions when it comes to our children's machines and equipment. I don't care who you are. I feel like it's guaranteed to be some version of a love-hate relationship. I love that by the end of the conversation, we concluded that our children aren't the only ones dependent on their machines. We are too, but more on an emotional level. They are certainly not all bad. I hope you laugh along with us. All right, let's jump in. Hi, Falesha. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
Awesome. So I'm really excited for this episode where we get to dive into children that are machine dependent or, have life-sustaining machines and equipment, because pretty sure, most of us listening, that is our life. And so this is just a very relevant episode, and I'm really grateful that you're willing to come on and, share things that you've learned. So to start off, I would love for you to kind of give some advice to parents that may be listening and are maybe still in the NICU and know that they're coming home with things like a trach or feeding tube, oxygen, etc. What advice do you have for them that you've learned from your experience?
Yes. So when we were in the hospital, our doctors told us that, Clea would probably need a trach, and that with that would come training for us and nurses for us. And I just remember thinking like in that moment of like, nurses training, like I didn't wrap my head around it. And they said that, yes, it's going to be hard work, but she's going to thrive.
Mm,
Having a trach, the quality of life, that she's not over stressing and overexerting all this energy to breathe, and she can breathe comfortably. It's going to allow oxygen to go to her brain. It's going to allow her to grow. And that's all I needed to hear.
mm,
I said, okay, if this is the best thing for her, I'm in. And
mm.
so once we were in, we got this pamphlet of like, here's everything you need to learn. And I remember thinking like, this is so much. Like,
Yeah.
okay. And I was on maternity leave, but my husband wasn't. So we have two totally different experiences around learning how to deal and handle a kid with a trach.
Mm,
So one thing we both decided to do, we're going to go all in on her training. So when it came to her training, we took it very serious. So we not only were taught how to do certain situations, whether it be trach care, trach change, we also were hands-on when we were in the hospital. So for the
mm,
parents who have children who are in the hospital and you're learning some of the different things around trach and vent, make sure you get that practice while you're in the hospital, while you have nurses and RT around you to troubleshoot
mm,
certain situations. And every single time I did it, it just built my confidence. So when
mm,
you come home, you have that high level of confidence that I can handle this because I've done it multiple times. And I
mm,
talked to other families who said, you know, we would get cleared to do one item and price on our daughter. And then that was it. We didn't do it again
mm,
because they were saying the doctors didn't ask them to do it. And so I spoke
mhm,
up. I was like, can I do that? And they were like, oh, yeah. And I had a nurse say,
mm,
after maybe about a month, and I saw her about 4 or 5 times in that month, she goes, I just want to say I've never had any parent ask me if they could do trach care as often as you have or ask me questions while I'm doing things. And I'm like, really? I was like, I thought I was bugging
mm,
you and being like overbearing. She goes,
mhm.
no, I could tell you're coming from a place of like, I want to learn. Just please
Yeah.
keep that. Please keep that
Oh,
like
yeah.
that energy and that mindset of like learning. So I would
Yeah.
say to keep that, like definitely be hands on
Mm.
and focus on like that training aspect of it because that will
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, I mean, like, that resonates with me so much. I was the parent who was not asking to do things. I felt so timid because it's just so weird where, like, you have this child and you're like, "I'm gonna be their parent," and then it's like, "Well, actually, they have these medical needs, and these professionals need to do so much of their care, in the NICU." I was, like, floundering of, like, "What is my role as a parent?" And I stood back, and when we took my son home, he came home with a feeding tube actually through his
Mm.
mouth called an OG
Okay.
tube, and we did not know what we were doing, and it was I thought we did, like, you do it there and you're like, "Okay, I think I got it," and then we went home, and it was a nightmare because we didn't know what we were doing. I was like, "We shouldn't have been released, like, we shouldn't have been sent home."
I
So I just love that
see.
you asked to
I
practice.
did. Yeah, and I thought in the moment I'm doing the most, and
Mhm.
to hear that doctor or that nurse say, "You're not," like, "I appreciate this." I'm like, "Okay, this feels good." Thank you for, confirming this and, like,
Yes.
reaffirming this because now I feel like, "Alright, I'm on the right path," but
Yeah.
I feel like even though I felt pretty confident in the hospital, home is so different.
Yeah.
So prepare yourself for that. Find nurses. I know nurses, it's hard to find, but one key thing that I did when we were interviewing our nurses is ask them how they felt in emergency situations, how they handled high pressure situations, because you get
Mm.
home and you don't have a full team of doctors. Like in a
Mhm.
hospital, like if there's an emergency, another nurse can come in the room. So you can have two, you can have a doctor come in the room. And as a parent, you can
Mhm.
sit back and kind of like monitor. When you're
Mhm.
home, it is that nurse and you. And so
Right.
finding someone that is confident in all of the machines, has handled different situations. So asking them like, "Hey, how do you feel an emergency trach change? Have you done one?
Mhm.
What are the steps that you would do?" And having those conversations. So we're actually in the moment right now. My daughter, her trach tie, just literally like an hour and a half ago, the tie part started to come off
Oh,
and it
wow.
fully came off, and she started coughing, and she made this,
Oh,
like, gargle noise, and me and my husband kinda thrown off, like, "What is this?" And the nurse
yeah.
just came to action her down, and quickly she put her hand on the tray and noticed that the tie was off, but she was so worked up that she was like, "I'm doing this. Can you go grab the vent? Can you grab this?" I ran and did that. My husband was
Mhm.
the support system for her, gave her a suction, and how she handled that situation was like, I felt like we have her. Like, that's our comfort blanket. Like,
Yes.
she's amazing.
Yeah.
And to know that she's totally capable of handling a situation like that, but to have those scenarios of knowing who does what, whose best role is in what situation. I ran track in college. So I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm the runner. Like, you need something
Yes.
fast, I'm off to do it.
That's
My
awesome.
husband is the logistic guy. Like, he's very hands on. So he's like very observant and he's like, okay, we need this. And I'm
That's
like,
awesome.
okay, where do you want me?
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and so
awesome.
having nurses that are very confident in what they're doing, because as you mentioned, like you get home and it's a different setting and
Yeah.
it just elevates kind of how extreme certain situations can be.
Yes, totally. And I know that it varies by states too, whether or not you can even qualify for home nursing, which I think is completely ridiculous. And I'm just thinking right now. So my son does not have a trach. He actually got kind of close to needing one, but he did not
Mhm.
have a trach. And just picturing these other parents, like in our state, not having home health nursing, like with something like that that's so life sustaining and so sensitive.
Right.
I'm kind of floored, but I guess that's a whole other can of worms.
Right, I'm learning about that too, like,
Mm.
the fact that some people get denied for coverage
Mm.
or the hours, like, our hospital in state was very serious about, you cannot go home without nursing support,
That's awesome.
and yeah, and so sometimes that's hard when, you're in a pandemic and nurses are short, there's a
Oh,
shortage of
yeah?
nurses, so I know some people who were in the hospital for months because they couldn't find coverage.
Oh my
And
gosh.
we were very thankful. It took us about 6 weeks to find our team, and I was really
Mm.
proactive about it. Like, I did a whole video. I printed out a flyer and put it in the, nursing in our Seattle Children's in their break room.
Oh,
because
wow.
they were letting go of travel nurses because of the pandemic. So I thought maybe I could find someone who just got let go and wanted to work with our family.
I
So I
love
was trying
that.
to be as creative as possible. I went a little crazy. So I made a video and then I typed in hashtag Seattle nurse. And I reached out to like the first 10 I saw and said,
Oh,
"Hi,
wow.
my name is Felicia. Here's my daughter's story. If you have anyone in mind," and share the video with them. So one of them said, "I'll share this to the Seattle Facebook group for nurses." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then we found one of our nurses through that.
Oh,
And
wow.
and so that kind of started like us finding our support. But Seattle Children
Mm,
said because I worked full time and so did my husband, if unless we were willing to quit work and be our caregiver, they probably would have let us home. But
mm,
because we couldn't, they said we had to have at least 4 nights covered
mm.
because that
That's
was the
awesome.
big part about like, needing your sleep to actually function and then care for your child.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Oh my
right.
gosh. That's amazing. I love all the stuff you did. That's so cool. And I hope that some parents listening are getting ideas of things to do, either to, set up your team for the first time, or maybe even like, hey, I don't feel super confident in our team currently. I'm going to switch out a few of those players, and make it the best team possible.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, kind of moving on, let's talk about, so you and Rome and Callie travel together and do
Yeah.
not let all the equipment, hold you back. I would
No.
love to hear your advice and tips and hacks and all the good stuff about, traveling and living life with machines.
Yes. So I feel like first we got encouragement from our team at the hospital. We said we're going home. It's a pandemic. So we went home June
Mhm.
2020 after being in the hospital for 5.5 months.
Mhm.
And our pulmonologist said, take her outside, go for walks. She needs to feel
Mm.
fresh air. Obviously do activities, do them in a way that's safe, but please
Mhm.
continue to live. And so that planted the seed.
Mm.
And then we got home and we realized quickly that she liked water. She just was like loving
Mm.
splashing. And we thought, oh, like that'd be so cool if we could go to the lake, something. And our nurse was like, we can. It's a trach and a vent. She was like, we can still do it. And I was like, okay, if you say we can, like,
Wow.
let's do this. And so we had her vent and she had found these straps. And so she's like, we'll put the straps on our back. So we'll have a backpack. We'll clip her circuit to this little floaty we had, and we're
Mm.
going to get out there and do it. I'm like, okay. And so we did. We took one
Wow.
trip to the lake, had Callie in this little floating toy, and she loved it. She took a nap
Mm.
in it. That's how much she loved the
Oh.
water. And she was fine. And then from that day on, we were like, we can do things. We can do
Mm.
more. And so ever since then, we've just continued to have that like motto of this trach will not hold us back. We're going to
Mm.
continue to show her the world. And I feel like every time we travel and go somewhere, she comes back with like this new milestone. It's just how good being outside and exposure and seeing different things help her
Mm.
in her everyday life. So some of the tips I have when it comes to just, traveling and continuing to living life with machines really comes down to like communicating with your nursing staff. So whether
Mm.
it's your nurse, maybe you don't have nurses and it's your partner, the communication. So
Mm.
do we have everything we need? Because we need to make sure we've got her emergency bag. We've got a backup vent. We've got oxygen. So we have all of that close by. And we have a little sheet too, now that we've been traveling. We traveled to San Diego recently. We created a packing list. And
Mm.
so check off everything. When it comes to like trach care and G tube kits, we put everything in a bag. So here's one for every day we need it for. Here's a G tube kit for G tube care.
Oh,
Here's
wow.
bath time. So we're very organized. And that makes us feel like, that feeling when you get to the airport and you're like, I forgot something. I
Yeah.
left something. We don't have that. We're like, we have everything. And
That's
so
awesome.
our nurse will pack it, then the second nurse will check off to make sure we have everything. And then we're communicating with them of like, okay, do we have this? Do we have that? And so that's
Mm.
one big thing is just being organized and making sure you have the backup machines and everything.
Mhm.
So that's been key
That's
for
awesome.
us.
I love that. And then you can really relax while you're there, I'm sure, rather than being like, I think we have, the backup vent or the suction machine. And you could be like, I have everything. Like you said, like none of that feeling.
Right, exactly. So when it comes to like traveling, like we did more local activities. So I
Mm,
feel like as the months went by, we ventured further and further away from home. So
mm,
we went for walks. Okay, that went well. Then we went for a longer walk.
mm,
Okay, then we went for a car ride to the lake. Okay, then we went for a 2-hour car ride to the lake. Then we went for a 3.5 car ride to the ocean. And then we took a plane, so like
mhm,
baby steps to see that she does well in environment. So seeing that your kid is stable, seeing how they react to certain environments is like, okay, they can handle this. So
mhm.
you're not going from being home to all of a sudden a flight 3.5 hours away. Like
Right.
that big jump is too much.
Mhm,
And knowing that we waited for like almost a full year to do a flight, it was nice to see that Callie was stable enough. And so we had her on the vent during the flight. We checked with the airline to make sure we could have everything carry on overhead. We called the airport in advance to see what their steps and procedures were to get through the airport. How much time will we get there early? She's on a G2. We wanted to make sure we got there enough time to have her feed run before we got on the flight. I
mhm,
picked the flight. I knew that was like her nap time, and I picked a flight that was 2.5 hours. So we went to San Diego. So just thinking through your child and how they react to certain situations is key. And just to
mm,
build yourself up to bigger trips. But definitely start off with smaller activities and
mhm.
venturing in your local town and then to kind of venture off.
I love that. Okay, here's a question. So for parents who are listening right now and maybe are like, "Oh my gosh, that sounds like so much work," or "Is that really worth it?" Tell us how awesome it's been for you guys to not be held back and to have these experiences with her and just as a family.
It's worth it. It's hard work. Yes, it takes a lot of prep work. I will say that. But when we're there, it truly does feel like a vacation. And to see your
Mm,
child light up, we went to the ocean and we walked out into the little water. She was like, oh, it's kind of cold. And then she was jumping and she
mm,
sat and the ocean waves came up on her for about an hour.
mm,
And she was smiling and clapping. And to see that joy in her face was just like, wow, this is worth it. And
mm.
also to see other families reach out to us and say, because you went on that trip and because we saw you do something like this, we feel confident we can. And
Oh,
that was the
wow.
other bonus to it, to feel all these families say, I'm so inspired that you guys are continuing to live life, whether they had kids with medical needs or not.
Mm,
It just was so gratifying. Like, wow. And so and I mentioned like we go and expose it to the world and then we come back and we see like her do new things. So
mhm.
before this, she would not sit up in the bathtub. She loved the water, but she had a little chair. We got back home and she's been sitting up in the tub splashing. And I think that exposure to the ocean, it did it for her.
Wow.
Um, Being around a lot of new people, like on the airplane, on the airport, that was
Mhm,
a lot. I've been seeing her be better with strangers and new people in different
mm.
environments. So you will see the benefits cognitively in your child when you expose them to new environments.
Oh, I love that, and I think there are probably a lot of benefits to kids traveling, period, whether they're typically developing or not. But, like we talked about in the previous episode, we are just we're more aware of that. Like we work more with them. We have therapies for them to kind of help them reach their potential. And so I'm sure that just like any other milestone, that probably is just so gratifying to watch her thrive.
Yes, it is. We're coming up on a year being home, and me and my husband were talking about doing like a homecoming party of some sort.
Mm,
And we take the time to sit back and reflect. And I do these like monthly milestone videos on YouTube for Callie.
mm,
And to see her thrive and to see all the amazing things she's done in a month and a year, it's like, wow, we're just in awe. Like,
mm.
sometimes I'm like, I can't believe she's doing it. And sometimes I'm like, that's my daughter. Like, she just keeps
Yeah.
showing up and just showing out. And so I'm not surprised by anything she does now. I'm just more of like sitting here waiting, like, what's she going to do next? Like,
Yeah.
she's just so amazing. And I really do hope as she gets older and gets to watch back our story and the videos and just the journey we've been on, she realizes like, I'm capable of all things. I can
Mm,
do big things. And my parents have always been there as like my advocates and my cheerleader to show me and just put me in a position to do great things. But at the end of the day, it's all
yes.
her. We're just here to like help her, but she
Mhm.
does all the work, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I'm telling you too, I'm sure that she will look back and maybe as she's an adult, like when you become a parent, you're like, oh, my parents did a lot for me. You kind of like can realize that. I'm
Yeah.
sure that even that will be such an example to her of like, look what my parents did, even like traveling. That's all it entailed to travel
Yeah.
with me. And I'm sure she'll be inspired by that too and have that as an example of her capabilities and that she can go and do whatever she wants. She won't be held back.
Right. No, it's so true. I feel like for me, I became a parent and
Mhm.
then I called my mom. I'm like, oh my goodness, thank you, mom. Like this
Yeah.
is hard work. Like,
Yeah.
you have those moments where you're like, oh, my mom this or my and I'm like, nope, you guys are awesome. Like
Yeah.
this being a parent is like the most selfless thing you could do. And
Mhm.
everything you do is for your child. And then you add the medical aspect of it. And we go through a lot from the surgeries or hearing doctors say, your child is not gonna be able to do this. And
Mhm.
we just lean into our child and we're like, nope, we're not gonna put a box or a limit on what they can do. And so it takes a
Mhm.
different type of work ethic and just mindset to be a medical parent, but it's so rewarding. And I feel like that
Mhm.
in everything in life, like nothing comes easy. Anything that's worth having takes hard work, and our children are worth having, and they're gonna live lovely lives. And it's
Mhm.
gonna take a little hard work, but it's gonna be just that more satisfying and rewarding when we see them do, one phenomenal thing.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I feel that so much. So to wrap up our last section, I guess, is the emotional aspect of having a child that's dependent on machines. Because there's a huge range of emotions, maybe resentment towards them and their dependency, and tons of gratitude for them and the life that they give your child, and maybe fears of something going wrong with the equipment and the feeling of weaning off of them at some point. So I would just love to hear what has your relationship, I guess, with the machines been like, and how's that evolved?
Yeah, definitely grateful for the machines and the fact that because they're here, they are able to help my daughter be comfortable and do everyday things that we do and just to
Mm,
breathe. And
right.
then to see her wean off of them, I'm like, okay, I'm ready for you guys to be done. I'm ready to, like, to put you to the side. It's
Yeah.
kind of nice when
Mhm.
child starts to wean off of them. You're like, oh, like we don't have to depend on this machine. And it's so
Mhm.
hard. It's so hard because you love technology and the fact that they're there to help your child thrive, but you don't want them on it forever. And that's kind of
Mhm.
like where I stand. And I know there's parents out there who kids will be on it for a while. And so there
Mhm.
is this balance of emotions around it when it comes to like being dependent on a machine. It definitely changes how you live and how you function and how you move because it's like, is it charged up? Do we have a backup one? There's so much
Mhm.
that there is that fear of what happens when it's not working properly.
Mhm.
Um, but I will say, like, for myself, early on, before I got home, I had to lean on therapy, and we had therapy through the hospital and
Mhm.
expressing how I felt about being a medical mom and some of the fears I had about going home and just having someone to talk to felt so good to be able to process my emotions in a healthy way
Mhm.
because I do feel like sometimes we bottle those emotions in. So like for instance, before I got home, our social worker said, I want you to feel confident. I want you to feel relaxed and have fun when you're home because your child can feel that. When you go
Mhm.
home, it's an intense situation, it's a new environment, and your child's looking towards you to make sure everything's okay. So if you're
Mhm.
nervous, they will feel that energy. And that put intense pressure on me to almost fake it till I make it.
Mhm.
And I felt like I was starting to bottle that in. And so talking to a therapist and
Mhm.
expressing how I felt and hearing them say, it's okay to be scared and thankful. You don't have to be one or the other. You don't have to be like,
Yes.
I love these machines. They're amazing for my child. You can also be like, I hate that they go off so often. I hate that they have to be on it. You can feel both emotions. And
Mhm.
so I lean into that. Like it's an
Mhm.
everyday process of like, okay, being one with how I feel about having a child who is dependent on a machine for however long she is on it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Talking to my therapist, she helped me learn that. I think it's like duality of emotions. I can't remember if there's like a
Yes.
technical term for it, but like that was so mind blowing because I don't know why, but it's this tendency to say, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling grateful. Like you feel like you need to have one emotion. But I think recognizing you don't have to choose one emotion is
No.
so powerful. And it really, I feel like with machines, especially, like, isn't that just the epitome of a duality of emotions, right? Like with my
Yes.
son's G tube, I was like, I hate this thing and I love it because without it, my son would not be alive, So it's
Exactly.
just,
Yes. Like we are having a difficult time right now with Callie's eating and just
Mhm.
her GI tract. She's not breaking down food fast enough. So she's been having large emesis and throwing up. And so that's a struggle. But without the G tube, she wouldn't be getting the right nutrients in her body to grow. And so it's
Mhm.
just like, I love it. But then it's also, like you said, it's like, oh, it's a struggle having to deal with it. My husband was asking me, at what point will, she be able to just sleep through the night and not to have a feed at night? And I'm like,
Mm.
oh, that's a great point. Like
Mm.
typical baby's probably around 6 months, having their day feeds. And then our doctor explained to us, well, she's not able to tolerate large volumes of food during the day.
Oh.
So we have to have 6 feeds and have it throughout the night. And so, you know, okay, that's one thing. But then there's also, it's nice to be able to put the pump in and attach a G tube and it goes. So it's just like,
Yes.
it's a struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. Because there is, like, this huge convenience with it too. Like, even
Yes.
with my son's hearing aids, so this is different because it's not life-sustaining, but, it is such a benefit or such it's so convenient where we pop out his hearing aids when he goes to sleep, like we're supposed to, and then we don't have to tiptoe around, and we can, like
Yes.
he doesn't even wake up, he doesn't hear us at all, and so there's definitely this, like, okay, so if we have another child, we'll have to be quiet while they nap. Like, what's that gonna be like?
Oh my
Again, it's
goodness.
just it's crazy because 'cause
It
they're really
is.
convenient in some ways.
There is. And so, a short story, but I was talking to Rome about this as well. And we're like, at some point, we'd love to have a second child and give Callie a sibling.
Mhm.
And then I started telling him, I'm like, okay, well, kids cry. Like Callie with her trach, air doesn't go through her vocal cord. So we haven't heard her really cry.
Oh,
And she's got
wow.
hearing loss. And so she also has a Baja.
Oh,
Same
okay.
thing. At night, sometimes I catch myself whispering. I'm like, okay, wait, she can't hear me.
Yeah, totally.
And
Totally.
the machines are going off and it's like, oh, it's not waking her up. And so
Mhm.
things like that. So I was like, okay, you do realize like our child comes home and I'm gonna have to be up, me and you, feeding them throughout the night. Like, oh, like maybe we can get a night nanny. I'm like, okay, that's a
That's so
no,
funny.
having night support, like things like that.
Yeah.
Like, so when she does have those moments where she's up from like 3 to 5, I'm like, our night nurse is helping to support
Mhm.
that. We're not waking up in the middle of the night. I'm like, we're gonna be so tired. We're gonna hear
Uh-huh.
lots of crying. They're
I
gonna
know.
wake up at every little noise we make. So like you said, yeah.
It is so weird. Like, and I even have an older child. Like, I've done like the typical, quote unquote, typical parenting experience. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, in a lot of ways, it was easier.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I'm like, yeah, I mean, like trying to breastfeed and stuff. Like, I didn't even try with Kimball because he couldn't eat by mouth. And so there are things where it's like, can I be a typical mom again? Like, am I
Yeah.
capable of this? Which is so weird because I mean, I'm sure that baffles, just typical parents, again, in
Yeah.
air quotes, because they're like, but your life is so much harder. It's like, but there are
But
things that are very convenient about it.
yes, yes, I agree. And that's been one nice thing is like to talk to you and talk to other parents of medical child. It's like you
Mhm.
get to have that community and we get to talk about our everyday life and you understand what I'm going through. And so I appreciate you for
Mhm.
like just having me on and like being able to chat about this because it's so healthy to be able to talk about your life and not feel like you're inconveniencing somebody, or it's like they won't understand. Like, we totally understand everything.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And that is like, the whole point of this podcast is to be able to have that solidarity and be like, they totally get it. And I'm sure, throughout the episode, I'm sure that so many parents have totally been there and, have felt so many things that we've talked about and are hopefully inspired by your tips on living life and getting out there. And I am just so grateful for you coming on and for sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I just appreciate being here and sharing our story. And you're inspiring me as well. Like, I'm learning so much about different families and different syndromes, and I think it's just wonderful the work you're doing and everyone being educated and inspired at the same time.
Oh, thank you so much. Don't miss next week's episode as I chat with a NICU nurse about her inspiration, her best moments, and her hardest moments, as well as a pep talk for all of us. It's a great one. See you then.